Most of us take the ability to listen to music for granted. The phonograph was not invented until 1877, and before that, if you wanted to listen to music, you either would have had to play it yourself, listen to a friend or family member play, or buy a ticket and go to a concert. Whereas nowadays, we can just go to Spotify or YouTube and listen to just about anything that's ever been recorded for free, which is an incredible privilege. But it's also something that's been weaponized and is being weaponized in order to, I think, lower consciousness and make a few bucks along the way. And this regression and modification of the purpose of music that's promoted on a massive scale, I think, began in the 20th century, specifically with rock and roll, which normalized self-destruction via drugs and sex with strangers, and has eventually led up to where we are today, which is just an amplified version of that. But I think it's clear that the pop music at the top of the charts is not intended to uplift and provide solace to the soul. For example, in times past, soldiers would historically sing for morale. And that's what music was really for, is for morale, to make you feel better, to uplift you, to feel a part of something greater than oneself, to make terrible times a little bit more bearable. Chain gangs would sing. Speaking of prisoners, I think one of the greatest scenes in movie history, relating to this subject, is in The Shawshank Redemption, when Andy Dufresne locks the warden's office and blasts Mozart on the prison sound system. And everyone becomes hypnotized by the beauty of it. They don't understand the music, but they can feel it. And Morgan Freeman narrates this scene beautifully. And the last phrase he says is, quote, "And for the briefest of moments, every last man at Shawshank felt free." Whereas modern music is mostly about violence, spending money, petty relationships, ego trips, sex, fashion trends, which are much easier to sell and get people addicted to, because these things appeal to the lowest fundamental parts of our being, the animalistic, flighty aspects of who we are, or pleasures of the flesh. To go a step further, the music can be tuned even to frequencies that impact our physiology by leveraging our chakra systems, which all resonate at certain frequencies. And I think the ultimate goal is pretty obvious. It's basically to reduce us to animals, specifically cattle, because cattle are much more easily controlled and harvested than wild, intelligent animals or beings in tune with their true natures. In tune, no pun intended there. And I've often wondered how this regression came to be. For example, Chopin, he wrote his first and second piano concertos when he was 19. Mendelssohn wrote, for example, Rondo Capriccioso when he was 15. All of these young geniuses, they weren't only interpreting music, they were writing masterpieces. Mozart, when he was not even 10, was writing beautiful works that are still appreciated today. What happened? Where are those minds being used today? And I think the artists of today, or people that have artistic minds today, are, because they definitely exist. Those types of people are definitely among us, but their energies are being put towards, if you want to make it blunt, I think it's white-collar fraud. Basically, make as much money as possible in the quickest possible way. Because an artist wants to be free. He doesn't want to be chained to a 9-to-5 job. He wants to be free to do what he wants and perform his art. But those people, I think, today are basically allocating their vast resources towards that, towards just making money and being free financially. That's what's going on. And I also think that people used to be more intelligent, as in people were healthier because the world was probably a healthier place to be a couple hundred years ago. You know, there weren't metals being pumped into us from birth. The food was of higher quality. We ate things that were in season, that most people were like breastfed. And I think that has something to do with it too, just healthier people. And also, you know, fluorides all over the place. I'm not even going to get into that right now. But having said of that, even though we're all very toxic and bombarded with so many different attacks from all angles, what still differentiates us from beasts is that we have the unique ability to choose what we want to do with our time. As in, if we're resourceful enough, not all of our time has to be spent on activities that are intended to keep us alive. So we can do things that resonate with our essence or soul, rather than just, you know, feed ourselves and work on putting a roof over our head. And classical music is one way to do this, one way to sort of free the soul and elevate it while it's still in the body by relating to it and speaking its language, which isn't, you know, in words. And this type of music, classical music, can only be intellectualized to a certain extent. But the real message of it cannot be expressed in words. You can't put your finger on it. Like anything that's really artistic, you can't put your finger on what it means. You understand it, but you can't describe it. And I think it's important to establish what classical music even is, objectively. And I want to say that the classical era is understood to mean the period in which the central classics, or the standard repertory, essentially the works of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, were composed, which is between 1750 to about 1830. The word classical is derived from Latin. Classicus, meaning of the first class. Defined in the Oxford English Dictionary as of the first rank or authority, constituting a standard or model. It is used to distinguish cultivated music that is not popular or traditional, and is used in a sense that implies acknowledgement of some kind of authority, seriousness of purpose, superiority, and of the idea that it has stood the test of time. It is applied to the music of composers of any era, from the Middle Ages to the present day, and might even be understood to include serious music of the avant-garde. Along similar lines, classical literature was written to provide inspiration, courage, and direction to the soul, for the soul. As you know, for example, Shakespeare and the like. You can go even further back and consider, you know, the Odyssey to be in that category. The message is getting across via a story, rather than just blatantly saying the message. You know, it was a little bit more subtle. Classical literature is meant to be dissected, and since it's more ambiguous, it allows people to interpret it in a way that resonates with them. It's specific to the meaning is specific to the reader, rather than just being a one-size-fits-all thing, which is kind of where we're at today with like self-help books and the like. You know, most books that are being sold in massive volumes are like nonfiction self-help books, people trying to heal their trauma. But, you know, show me somebody who doesn't have any trauma, and, you know, you'll probably find somebody who hasn't learned all that much, or is traumatized by the fact that they haven't been traumatized. So classical music and classical literature are basically tools to help us accept the hardships of life as universally human. Heartbreak, regret, confusion, sickness, abuse, loss. These are nothing new. We've lost our ability to cope with these hardships because we don't actually accept and live through them. We instead distract ourselves because we so easily can. We're not actually present. We basically try to cheat the pain. That eventually comes back to bite in other ways because it's not being addressed. But nonetheless, the debt has to be paid at one point or another. But it's life-changing to have the tools and resources to face hardships head on, which most people in the modern era don't have because they weren't instilled. These resources, which can be developed via classical music and classical literature, make it easier to put things in perspective rather than just jump to the next distraction. Not everyone is lucky enough to have parental figures or teachers who actually expose them to these resources, unfortunately, because most children these days are not raised by their parents but by pop culture. But I doubt in 300 years we'll still be listening to the garbage like Miley Cyrus, Post Malone, Travis Scott, outside of an analytical context. But I do bet that people will still be studying and appreciating Bach, Liszt, Chopin, and Shakespeare, though. And another difference is that these artists didn't create their art for the same reasons. They didn't do it for fame or for a quick buck, but because they were aware. I mean, that money was certainly a part of it. They did produce to feed themselves, but that wasn't the point. It was that they were aware of their genius, devoted their life to developing it, and wanted to share it with the world because there was nothing else to do. Is there anything better to do? I can't think of anything better than that. So listening to classical music is an act of rebellion. Reading classical literature is an act of rebellion. Being spiritually and mentally equipped to face anything life throws at you without needing to distract yourself or poison your body is gangster.